Regent Sutherland.
Here.
Checking on quorum right now, but again, a reminder, no action will be taken today.
We have quorum.
We have quorum. So James Lee, the next item of business is approval of minutes. If you want to.
Yes, do I hear a motion that they've been posted? To hear a motion to approve the minutes?
So move, Regent Whitten.
Second, McGraw.
Any objection to the motion to approve? Motion passes by consensus.
All right.
All right, Vice Chair, if you don't mind, today we'll have an information-only budget workshop, and we're going to get a hold of Chair Hamilton. We would encourage you all today to give us your input. This is the first time in KCTCS history that we know of we've had a budget workshop. We think this is great for good governance. Again, no action will be taken today, but we do want to hear from you, given the information that we now have, now that session's over with, and we're going to give you 3 distinct budget presentations today from Todd Kilburn and Bridget Cantor. But please ask us questions along the way if you'd like to. Session concluded a couple weeks ago. We're very appreciative of the funding that we received from our legislators this session. And also a reminder that we did get all 3 pieces of our priority legislation passed as well. So once again, feel free to ask questions, give us your input as we prepare the budget for the June Board of Regents meeting down in Hopkinsville. If it's okay, Mr. Vice Chair, I'm going to hand this over to Todd Kilburn.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vice Chair. Thank you, Dr. Quarles. We wanted to have a conversation today around the various pieces that are involved in our budget, make you aware of where we stand after the conclusion of session this year, and think about the items as we look to the June board meeting. We thought we'd give you an opportunity through this budget workshop to give us feedback and your thoughts, so that as we come to that June meeting, you already have a sense of the whole overall context of what we're doing, and that we can come with recommendations at that point that we've already to some degree talked about with you around budget. So just to work through the presentation, our annual calendar that we have begins really early in the fiscal year, but in March, we start talking about the operating budget. We had the meeting at the Fire Commission. We began talking about things like the reserves, a couple of other pieces. And so we tried to put that out to you for some initial conversation. Here in April, we continue discussions here with the President's leadership team, as well as looking at our annual operating budget. And today, the board workshop. This is part of that budget planning. And then as we're doing this, each of our colleges is preparing its budget around some of the guidelines that we've put together, understanding that reserve, understanding what tuition is going to look like as we propose it. Then in May, we will have, by next week, each of the colleges will have submitted their budget in preparation for the June meeting. And then in June, by then, each of our colleges under our current structure, their college board will approve their annual operating budget. We will bring our budget to you for some final determinations around salary increases. And then once you've approved it, then that approved budget will be put into the college's budgets within the software that we have, and loaded for the next fiscal year. So it is a pretty tight timeline to get everything done and finished by the end of June. But this is where we stand. And in the budget workshop today, again, we wanted to talk to you about some of the factors that have gone into our decision-making and get your feedback along the way. So I want to talk to you about a few things that have happened within the budget this year. At the last hour, we had the privilege of having our state base, both appropriation and our performance funding, remain flat. We were talking about potentially a 7% cut a few months ago, and potentially a 3.9% cut The base appropriation performance funding has remained steady. We did have some additional House requests for mandated program increases. You will see that adult agriculture remained flat. Our state fire and rescue training, which you may see in our documents, has decreased, but that actually moved to be paid from somewhere else other than the base appropriation and an additional mandated program. Our KCTCS trains program increased, and then we received some funding for the Bosque Training Center operations, which was added. So we have those revenue changes. We'll talk about what those are in a little more detail in a moment. When we talk about what happens with revenue, there's also potential tuition rate increases. Last year, CPE set our ability to increase our tuition rate by $6 per credit hour for the current fiscal year that we're in, and for next fiscal year up to $3. And we will be coming to you in June with a recommendation around that. And then we start taking a look at where do we stand on enrollment and potential enrollment increases, and what does that do on the revenue side. On the expense side, even though we did not see any decreases in our funding, for which we're thankful, we have seen some expense increases. There are certainly inflationary increases that have occurred. The last couple of biennia, there were inflationary adjustments that were given in addition to the base. We don't have that in this next biennium. There have been increases in operational costs, and the big one that we've talked about is an 18.6% insurance increase, which is being built into our budget as we speak. And then we're seeing some changes potentially in our scholarships through KIA. We're seeing dual credit, one of the scholarships each year for our high school students in junior and senior years. Will only be allowed one dual credit course scholarship rather than two. The Work Ready Kentucky scholarships are being reduced to some degree. So we're seeing those numbers potentially affect how we're looking at our budget numbers. So just as way of context, those are some of the things that we're taking into account. Further in the budget context, we have had some capital projects to be approved to build the prison education building, a building at Jefferson, and some aviation equipment at Madisonville. We're still working on some of the details around that. And then funding for asset preservation, $10 million in this next fiscal year and $24 million in the second year of the biennium. So as an overall picture, those are the numbers that we have, in essence, been waiting for to try to put the whole package of the budget together. And that's where we stand at this particular point. When we look at the biennial budget, and I won't dig too much into the details, but just so that you see in the current fiscal year, that left-hand column, 25-26, we had a base appropriation this year of $165 million plus. That base adjustment was an inflation increase in this current year, which brought our grand total to $172,696,700. You'll see that's the number that carries forward in the base appropriation for each year of the next biennium. So that inflationary adjustment was included, but there was no additional inflationary adjustment that was given. Our performance funding was approved to stay at the current level. Under our mandated programs, adult agriculture remains the same. That fire and rescue training, which is going to be funded from somewhere else other than our mandated programs, that was removed, but that funding is going to the Fire Commission. KCTCS trains was increased by almost $2 million to $6 million across each year of the biennium. Our fire and tornado premiums were reduced only because the cost of the premiums across the state reduced to that amount. That's an actual amount that we pay. So that number was decreased because that's the cost of the premium. And this past year, we had a $1 million allocation non-recurring for our forensic audit to pay for that because that's concluded. That $1 million was a one-time appropriation that we don't receive moving forward. And so debt service down at the bottom has to do with new capital construction. We did not receive any debt service dollars in the final budget that we received. So we have seen the base operations continue to be flat, a few reductions here and there. But overall, we think this came out to be a pretty good budget for us, considering where we started at the beginning of session, and for which we're thankful. So are there any questions on that side before I move on? Okay, then under our revenue items, as to give you a context of the dollars that we're talking about as we start talking about tuition and enrollment projections, et cetera, we will come to you on June 11th for an action on approved tuition rates. And these, we're talking about in-state rates at the moment. For every $1 increase per credit hour to our in-state tuition rates we receive, the net across our system is $1.27 million. And so,
Can I interrupt you? There's bad background echo. A bad background. Are you guys experiencing the same thing?
Anyone else hearing a bad background?
I am not.
It's all garbled.
Regent Hunt, that might be isolated to you. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Regent Hunt, can you sign off and come back on? That might help with the sound.
I apologize. I can't hear a thing. It's on my end though. Is that correct?
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know what I did. I didn't change anything. So what do I need to do?
Can you log off and log back in and see if that helps?
Again, can you text that to me possibly? I don't know what's happened here.
Yeah, so Shannon will text you right now with some possible solutions.
Let me hang up.
Yes.
Yeah, if you can sign out, and then if you can sign back in. Shannon will communicate with you right now.
Okay. Okay.
So we'll continue to move forward on the general context here. So under our enrollment projections, for every 1% increase in full-time credit hour enrollment, again, across the system, our colleges net $2.48 million in enrollment. So when we look at the total dollar amounts, and we start thinking about enrollment for this year, that's the dollar number that we come up with. For our state appropriations with performance funding, again, our performance pool remains flat at about $25 million. System services, or what we hold here at the system office, the amount that we're actually affected by here at the system office is a $3 million decrease because of how things have played out at some of the individual colleges, which we'll be working on to adjust accordingly. Here's a chart that I realize now that it's up there is a little difficult to see, but just to, as you take a look at it, if you have that in front of you, you'll see those total dollar amounts we wanted to share with you. Here's the impact at each of our colleges as to what a tuition rate change would make with that amount at the bottom under a $3 amount of $3.8 million. And then on the next slide, it is what does our revenue look like based on enrollment changes? Again, you will see this tuition net of waivers and the numbers that are here for each of the colleges and the fire rescue program as well. So all of those numbers, should we have a 1% increase, that's again the $2.485 million in tuition revenue that increases as enrollment increases.
1 second, Regent Sutherland has a question.
Okay.
So, quick question, Todd.
Yes.
You were saying that in the it passed, I think we get one dual credit scholarship and then they get 2 work-ready credits or classes. Is that correct for the dual credit students?
No, what we're told now is that through Kia, there have always been 2 dual credit classes on the gen ed side in both the junior and the senior years. And that number is being reduced to 1 per year
For just gen ed.
for just gen ed. 2 will stay on the technical side.
So
That one.
we really don't know if they're like, will the student take the discounted rate and just, pay the money out of their pocket because it's a better deal? Or will they just, is that going to back off that number that those dual credit students are taking?
What a timely question. We were talking about that earlier today with our presidents. This could impact students that get one class covered, but not both. Every county will be different. Some counties have supplemental funding through community foundations, et cetera, to pay for that. We are trying to project what this adjustment, which was administratively determined by Kia, how that would affect our system. I know that I've talked with Regent Whitten about this as well, concerns across the state about it.
Regent Whitten has a function as well.
Regent Whitten?
Yeah, Dr. Quarles, just to kind of go back to what you were saying. So, I had asked you previously if Todd, maybe you can answer this question, have the presidents and their respective CFOs, and perhaps with the guidance of the system office, have they been able to kind of go ahead and begin those projections on what that looks like based on their current dual credit populations? Some of us, of course, are more affected than others with that. And of course, Dr. Quarles, not something that you didn't bring up. I know it's not money, but that academic sequencing is also affected with the removal of those credits your junior and your senior year. For example, English 101 and 102. They would now take it fall and then take it again, fall of their junior year, then fall of their senior year, which puts a semester gap in the sequencing of those courses. For example, the same thing could happen to Gen Chem 1, Gen Chem 2, bio, some of those other courses as well. So I just didn't know if any of those questions had been answered at this point. Thank you.
Thank you. We've challenged our team, particularly ORPA here at the system office, to run some projections for us. Long story short, we asked that question today. It's extremely hard to predict how this will look because of all the different variances across the state. Plus, we do know that some of the 4-year universities are changing their policies across dual credit. Perhaps you've heard about that. Team, any additional insight on this question?
I would just say we have been trying to take a look at this. We've got a couple of initial swipes at it, but it's not anything solid that I think we want to put out there at this point. But we are trying to figure that out because for the very reason that you mentioned, as well as we're trying to distinguish between students who may take 2 dual credit classes now, who may only have the opportunity to take 1. Would they just not take the second one? And we're also looking at students that may take 3 or 4 courses and pay for it themselves. Would that actually have the same impact, or would they be willing to cover that themselves? So we're digging into those numbers, but the farther we dig in, the more detail we need to investigate.
Yeah, and just 2 quick points on this. We have a clear communication that's being sent to the students right now, so that they can have a letter or email in hand to explain what the options are going into the fall semester. And other than that, we know that the growth of dual credit puts more financial strain on the amount of dollars available, not just for dual credit scholarship, but for work ready, CAP, keys, everything that the Kentucky Lottery presumably funds most of that. So there's increased pressure on all sorts of aid across the state as well.
Okay. So for those of you who might be interested in the detail, this is a state appropriation change crosswalk broken down by our institutions, understanding where the base is, what proposed performance funding is based on the metrics that we've seen both to the left-hand side, you see our current fiscal year. Toward the right side, under the blue headings, you will see the 26-27 projections that are there. System contracts and services, those are the total chargeback to the institutions. For those of you who may be newer board members, the way that we work this is there are things that we pay for across the system or services like payroll, other things like our PeopleSoft software or other things that we obtain for the entire system. Those things are paid for from our office in one fiscal year, and then we allocate that to each of our colleges in the following year. In the past, there was some question about the accounting of that, but since before I arrived, that model was changed so that we can confirm exactly what the amount is, and we're not overcharging our colleges. So you'll see those numbers here, and the net state appropriation and the change over the fiscal year. We're seeing some changes to hazard on the performance-based funding side. And again, what I mentioned at the system office side, you'll also see those declines in the fire and tornado premium at the bottom and the forensic audit for the reasons that I stated earlier. So this will give you a sense of where things live at each of the colleges and what the changes would be for each of our institutions. So when we start,
Sorry, Regent Whitten has a question.
okay, Regent Whitten.
I'm muted, sorry. If you go back to the last screen, if you wouldn't mind, Todd, I'm just curious, since the only like glaring change in any of the institutions is Ashland, I was wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. It looks like that is in performance funding. There's a really big difference there for Ashland.
There is, based on the various pieces, and I can potentially dig into that a little bit more. The performance-based funding formula is a little complex. I don't have that information right in front of me and don't want to speculate based on my memory, but we can get that information out to you.
That's fine. It was just kind of glaring, so I wanted to just touch base with that. Thank you.
Yep. So under our expenditure items, just to lay this out before we begin the compensation discussion, when we look at compensation increases, again, based on what we shared with you, each 1% salary increase or compensation increases would be 3.33 million. These don't work out perfectly because of rounding, but at 2%, that would be 6.66 million. At 2.5%, compensation increase would be 8.32 million. And at 3%, that would be 9.98 million. And then our current faculty promotion candidates are projected to cost $422,000. When we take a look at some of our other key expenditures, the fringe benefits, this is where we build in the benefits, and this is where you will see insurance particularly increase that. We pay a 43% fringe rate that covers employee benefits. To cover the cost of the increase in insurance, that number is going up to 47% this year. So the total benefit cost is $8.3 million on the fringe benefit side. And then we do have other utilities, maintenance and operations, other fixed cost increases. Some we're still trying to wrap our brain around. Fuel, for example, right now is an increased cost, or utilities are going up, as many of you may be experiencing in your own personal lives. And so we are seeing some of these expenditure items increase. And so with level funding, we're trying to figure out how we best manage this. And we've asked the colleges at their level also to take a look at this and try to budget accordingly based on these expenditures.
Yeah, so just a little commentary here. So if you remember last year, the current fiscal year, health insurance increased 18.6%. And so that was about an $8 million hit to the system. I should say additional charge to the system that we decided to absorb on behalf of the colleges. So we've adjusted the fringe benefit rate from 43 to 47. So for planning purposes, we incorporate that. So that's just an explanation about additional pressures that we're dealing with.
Regent Stevens has a question.
Todd, I have a question is in the salary increases of 1, 2, 2.5, and 3. Well, put the slide back up. You've got me confused now. Yeah. So so no matter what we give increase, those faculty promotions would remain the same and the fringe benefit cost would approximately remain the same at $422,000 and $8.3 million. Is that correct?
Yes, and the fringe benefits are in essence built into those other numbers of increases. But the faculty promotions specifically, that number would remain the same. If the board voted not to give any salary increases, that would be the cost of just the faculty promotions.
Thank you, sir.
And then again, we've tried to give you some detail here so you can see where those compensation increases would lie at each of our institutions. So you can see from each of our colleges, from the fire commission and from the system office, what that increase involves at the 1%, 2%, 2.5%, and 3% level. And so that's where we get those numbers. And then the cost of the faculty promotions on the next slide. Again, this is laid out per college. And then finally, this is where we come up with the number around the estimated costs of our fringe benefits. And the total in that bottom right corner, $8,329,000. That's the total cost of that increase in insurance that's built into these rates as we estimate this across the system. I also wanted to answer, the board raised a question at the last meeting, and I wanted to answer that question as part of this presentation. The question was, could we offset reduced revenues? At the time, we were looking at potentially a reduction in our base, and could we increase expenses via enrollment increases? And my answer is theoretically yes, but I just want to point out, and we've been asked when we put our budgets together to model a 3% compensation increase as a matter of course, so that we're making that a priority. So based on that, if that's how we decided to go forward, we would need a $3 per credit hour tuition increase and a 2.5% enrollment increase to address both faculty promotions and a 3% increase in compensation. So the expense for the insurance, the cost of fringe benefits, if nothing else were cut or reduced, that $8.329 million across the system, if we were going to cover that without making any reductions or adjustments to our budget, that would require an additional 3.35% increase in enrollment to cover that expense. Our current enrollment projections for next year, while they're still preliminary, is at about 1.2% of an increase in enrollment based on our ORPA report from last week. And there would be additional challenges if scholarships and grants are reduced. So theoretically, could we potentially, if there were budget cuts, resolve that through increased enrollment? We could, but we've got a lot of things happening here, and we're trying to figure out how we manage that and where the priorities would lie, and why we're coming to you as a board for guidance and thought around what we do in that regard.
Jen Stevens has a question.
I have yes, I have another question, Todd. Could you put together, if the board were decided to get a 3% raise, and I don't know how to say this other than say it. I'm sure a 3% raise is going to affect a lot of our colleges and their resources or so. So, and I don't want to put an extreme burden on it, but I do want to take care of our employees. So could you some way, if we gave a 3% raise, is there any of our 16 colleges going to be in financial trouble, and maybe that systems office or some way we can help them? Thank you, sir.
And I would say I think we certainly would have some of our colleges that would struggle and have to try to figure this out. The challenge always is when we're talking about compensation increases, those are recurring expenses that go on year after year after year. And so when we talk about our reserves, we generally don't want to use our reserves, which are one-time funds, to fund ongoing things. We need to try to adjust our budgets to manage that accordingly. And so we could come back with some recommendations around that, but that'd be the challenge, and there will be some of our smaller colleges.
And just a reminder, but all of the 16 presidents have planned for up to 3% increases this next year for planning purposes.
Regent McGraw has a question.
Yeah, thank you for all of the information. It's very helpful. And in looking at it, I assume you've done some sort of sensitivity analysis that if you're projecting, a 1.2% increase in enrollment, but if you adjust the tuition by X number of dollars, that'll then have a negative impact on enrollment. Is that a correct assumption that you have some sort of range of sensitivity analysis around that?
We've not, thank you for the question, Regent McGraw. We've not done a great deal of research around that. As far as these particular numbers are concerned. And so I'm not sure that we have that data, but we can certainly look into that.
Yeah, I don't want you to do a lot of extra work, but you probably even just maybe anecdotally over time have observed a pattern of, tuition increase. Then at some point people say, all right, they just simply can't afford it. And then they decide not to go. And I'd just be curious what that range might be.
We're happy to do that. Elasticity affects us as well. And the other thing is, just because we have an increased enrollment doesn't automatically mean that there's more revenue to work with, because our technical programs may be more expensive than some other areas where there may not be as many expenses for that program as well. So we're happy to do that.
Exactly. Yeah, no, thank you.
And this is why we're having this meeting today. So thank you.
Regent Whitten had her hand up as well. I don't know if she still has a question. Regent Whitten, do you still have a question?
I don't actually. Dr. Quarles clarified, because Todd had said something about, that it could be a struggle, but it's more of a struggle. The 3% has been allotted for this year again, correct? It's just moving forward on that recurring base. That's what you're saying.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
So again, summarizing all of this as we start thinking about the compensation question and our budget question, we felt it was important to bring to you an understanding of here's the total context, here's what we're working with at this point. In June, we will be bringing to you an action on an approved tuition rates of that $3 per credit hour. We want you to understand here's what that dollar figure means as far as every $1 increase. And then our upcoming decisions on expenses, we will have the full budget, but really the key piece is recommendations that we would come to you with regarding compensation increases for next year. And note, for every 1% salary increase for regular faculty and staff costs $3.33 million. So we just want to put that in context, because I know there's a lot of numbers, there's a lot of data to look at. But as we start thinking about what compensation is, we can start looking at percentages, but I wanted to try to connect those percentages with dollars, so you as a board have the information to help us make an informed decision.
Regent Stevens has a question.
Yes, ma'am. To follow up on Regent McGraw's comments, Dr. Walls, could you give us some idea of how many at my college, how many students receive financial assistance? I know that as we graduated a lot of students debt-free, and I think that's important and I know the federal budget or so, but could you provide us sometime with by colleges of the number of students and what assistance they're getting so they do not have to pay back? Thank you, sir.
Yep, happy to do that. Put that on our list. Thank you. Okay, if there's any questions, additional questions for Todd, let me know. If not, Vice Chair Stevens, we can move into, yes, Regent McGraw.
Yeah, sorry, I do have one more question. I know you folks have a very tight budget, but as you looked at all the potential increases in costs, have you also looked at any areas where you could reduce expenditures?
Yes, absolutely. So we've challenged our presidents, again, not knowing until literally 2 weeks ago what the final budget outcome would be to look at what a 1, 2, or 3% or so reduction would look like. As you know, with our budget, most of our resources go towards personnel. There's that. But we did get some good language out of the General Assembly for the selling of property. For example, if we were to sell assets, we get to recoup the sale of that. And so we're challenging our colleges to look into that. Of course, that'd be one-time infusion of funds, but we do have the ability to do that right now. And that also goes into what we used to call our geographic footprint instrument to really measure the space utility of all of our buildings as well. Other reductions we've looked at would be primarily focused on operational expenses.
Thank you.
And I will say that we did, as part of the system chargebacks that we give to our colleges, we have been looking at ways that we could reduce that. And overall, that number was increased across our campuses by about $3 million this year, which allowed each of the colleges to have a little more revenue to work with in the current environment.
Okay.
I got a couple questions.
Okay.
This is Ken Hunt speaking. Is there a statutory limitation on how much we can raise tuition?
There is. And so the Council on Post-Secondary Education every 2 years sets what the maximum each institution can increase tuition. For everyone else except KCTCS, they do a percentage. They give us a dollar amount that we're allowed to go up. And so they give us a maximum of $9 over 2 years. And last year, 6 of those $9 were increased per credit hour. And so we have up to $3 per credit hour that can be increased this year. I believe the public 4 years had up to 4.9% over 2 years to increase their tuition. But to answer your question, yes, the Council on Post-Secondary Education does establish ceilings on tuition raises.
And again, not to repeat, but are you saying what is the maximum increase that you're allowed?
For this upcoming year, the maximum will be up to $3 per credit hour.
$3. So that's okay.
Which,
The next
which
question,
will,
just an anecdotal thing. I've attempted to meet up with at least one staff member here locally just to get a little more insight into what's going on at the school. And they've got conflicts because of travel and out of town conferences that this person has been going to. And again, not being critical whatsoever, but I'm just saying that's just something that struck me as I guess as far as prioritizing those types of things, are all those things, are there things that we're looking at in that regard that off campus or whatever that may be a place that we could look to reduce expenditures, travel, conferences, that type of thing?
yes. Yes, in fact, our KCTCS system-wide conference is next month, and one of the beneficiaries of that is that we're going to have professional development in state. So there's more opportunity for people to utilize that without leaving Kentucky, and also having a virtual option that allows our employees to gain that professional development, perhaps more accessibly through a homegrown professional development event as well. But yes, sir, we'll look at travel.
Thank you.
And James, before we transition to the next presentation, I thought we were around 80% receive financial aid, but I just got information it's 82.5% of our students have financial aid. So I was just off by a little bit.
I have another question for Dr. Qualls or you or Todd. One, the 3% raise, is that on the basic salary of all employees across the system?
It's
Yes.
on all full and part-time regular employees that are hired as of March 31st and have a
Good.
meets or higher performance rating.
To include the KCTCS president's cabinet as well as the 16 colleges presidents and their cabinets, correct?
Correct.
Thank you.
If it's okay with you, Vice Chair Stevens, we'll roll into, now we're talking about compensation. Have Bridget Cantor, Vice President, Human Resources, cover that part of the presentation.
You have another question. I think Brianna has a question, Dr. Qual, before we get there, please.
Okay.
Yeah, just really quick, and it's actually to follow up what on what Regent Hunt said. So and I'm just curious, Dr. Quarles, if you've heard from the PLT, you know, Regent Hunt was kind of suggesting that we could kind of not freeze, right, but maybe start kind of really cutting down on travel and things at the local institutions. I mean, I'm under the impression that most institutions are already minding their dollars pretty tightly where those things are concerned, at least with faculty and staff. I can only speak to the experience that I hear from around the state. So can you speak to that at all? I mean, are we already kind of minding our dollars pretty closely system-wide?
I believe the answer is yes. In fact, travel came up just as recently as this morning with PLT, especially with a lot of meetings here at the system office, people hopping in their cars to come here, but we're happy to look into that. In fact, we have several members of PLT joining us today. If they would like to chime in, you're more welcome to, but we're happy to do that, Regent Whitten.
I'll speak to that. Yes, certainly, we're looking at travel across the college and reducing that as much as possible. We've already tried to be very mindful of that. Now, sometimes we do have grants like Title III and such that will provide for PD and travel opportunities for the folks that are either on that grant or working with that grant. So sometimes you might see travel there, but it's usually written into the grant specifically, so that we have those dollars allotted for that and it's covered by the grant.
Thank you, President.
Just one comment that I wanted to add, you know, one of the perks for our employees and for our students is for our employees to be able to go to other institutions, to share knowledge, to be able to pull knowledge back for our, you know, to teach our students to further innovate with across the campuses. So I do want, you know, I don't want that to be just straight across the board. I think it's important for our employees to be able to have those opportunities for professional development, whether it's, you know, in state, out of state, or abroad.
Thank you. And while we're on the topic, I do have to give kudos to our technology solutions team. They're constantly looking for savings with new purchases of computers, et cetera, the renewal or extension or termination of contracts as well. They're constantly finding ways to stretch the dollars. If it's okay with you, Vice President Cantor.
Well, good afternoon. So I just wanted to start, the first slide for you all is a little bit of a historical context as it relates to compensation for us at KCTCS. If you recall, and you can change the slide for me there, Keith. Thank you. So as you all recall, you know, we went through this huge compensation overview with Huron Consulting Group. And as a result of that, the Board of Regents approved a new salary schedule and overall compensation program for KCTCS that was implemented in July of 2024. And what you'll see there on the screen is the actual objective that is part of that compensation program. So our main objective in doing so is to attract and retain talent through market competitive compensation practices. The history there is just, again, more as an FYI for all of you of different actions that the Board of Regents has taken as it relates to compensation for KCTCS's employees over the past several years. Most recently, last year, you'll recall we did a 2% across the board increase, and then there was an additional 1% compression adjustment that we used at the time, a factor of years of service to determine how much employees would get of that additional 1%. Next slide. So as part of the compensation program, we made a commitment that every 2 years we would do a review of, and we would benchmark our program and our positions against that of the market. So that happened this past, I suppose I should say the beginning of 2026 is when we concluded all of that. And our program is based solely upon Coupa HR salary survey data. And so that is the Colleges and Universities Professional Association of Human Resources. There's a delay and a lag in that data submission and when it actually spits back out to us. So the review that we did here in 2026 is actually based upon 2024 data and just based upon when it comes out. So what we do here at the system office for the entire system is we submit that salary data for all of KCTCS. And we utilize data from Big Sandy, which represents the small college on the eastern part of the state, Bluegrass, which is one of our larger enrollment colleges, centrally located. West Kentucky is that mid-size in the western part of the state. And then the system office, we only use administrative positions. So that's where more of the cabinet level presidents, that salary information comes from the system office data. So that's what gets submitted to Coupa on behalf of KCTCS. And then we compare ourselves based upon who else decides in that salary survey from across the nation, what gets submitted to them. So for us within our program, and I think this just gives you a little bit of an idea of how the program itself actually works for us. So for us, we have 365 positions that are part of our compensation program. And that includes staff positions and faculty positions. So all of our employees fall within those 365 position titles somewhere. We have 115 of those 365 positions that we call their direct matches. So if you looked at Coupa's data and you compared the position responsibilities of those 115 positions, we say they're a direct match to what our positions and the responsibilities of those positions are. So what happens to the other 200 plus positions? That's where within our system, we have what we call a calibration. So we might have, for example, an accountant 3 position that is a direct match to Coupa data. So we take that, if that's a direct match, and I'm just going to say it's a pay band 12 position, because it's an accountant 3, then an accountant 2 is going to be the next pay band down, and you can go up, and ours go up to 5. So we calibrate based upon the direct matches and then go from there. So it doesn't mean that just because someone is in an accountant 2 position that they're not banded appropriately or they're not benchmarked to the market data, because they're calibrated against that direct match, if that makes sense. Any questions about that? Okay. Next slide. So after we did that review, so we did the entire review and benchmarked those positions again. And I will have to tell you, it's the first time that has been done in a number of years. Obviously, it's the first time that we've done it with this new structure. And it was very interesting for myself and for my staff to really be able to dig in it and look at the positions and the data and what was happening in the fluctuations. Based upon when we looked at all of that, there were full transparency. So there were for sure changes in different positions where they benchmarked 2 years ago to where they benchmarked now. In some areas, we saw large shifts up, and then in some positions, we saw large shifts down as well. And so it became very apparent to us that the fluctuation in just that 2 years of data, because we were looking really at a single year, because we did the Huron study based on 2022 data that they aged forward for us to 2023. And then we now are reviewing 2024 data. So really, we're looking at a single year of true data points. And there's a lot of variation in that. So depending upon who decides to submit their data to Coupa, it's going to vary every year. So while in 2022, you might have had a bunch of colleges that decided to submit salary data for that accountant 3 position, in 2024, we might not have any. And so that creates a disparity in how we're able to benchmark. So the respondent data changed a lot. You also had differences in geographic locations of who responded to the Coupa data. So in all, when we looked at all of that and we said, okay, is it really, the question that I posed to the president's leadership team was, and we wrestled with it here ourselves, was, is it really responsible for us when we know that we have limited financial resources to make changes to that salary schedule when we know it's only going to impact a smaller portion of the KCTCS employees? Where's the biggest bang for our buck when we're also looking at data that is based upon a single year, a single point in time, and there's a lot of fluctuation and variation in that. So we had some very robust conversations, I would say, as a cabinet here, as well as amongst with the presidents. And ultimately, the recommendation that we have put forward and we discussed is that we don't believe it makes sense for us to make a change to the KCTCS salary schedule for this upcoming fiscal year. And I'm going to pause there if there's any questions about that. Yep.
I assume that means I'm getting called on. I heard the pause. Of course, it's me. I have the question, VP Cantor. So I'm curious if we go back to that slide on compensation and classification review, where you're showing that, you know, all these positions were benchmarked with Coupa. So, you know, a question I've always wanted to ask, kind of since we put, you know, I call them, you know, the Huron genus, class, phylum, species, right? Since we've put everybody into our categories and everybody is aligned, right? That was always the hope. My question now is a year later, you know, almost a year and a half later, have we now ever audited our institutions, our 16, to verify that they are following protocol, that they are following, so we don't get into the mess that we were before, right? Because there was always some leeway when someone was hired, we could kind of change things. I wondered if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, so I can tell you we have for sure, there's been one specific audit that we have done. There was a lot of conversation, you might recall, as this was rolled out as it related to the management classification. With regards to this, we had a criteria that you had to have the equivalent of 2 full-time direct reports to have that management classification. So my office has done an audit of that, and we have dealt with individual colleges where there needed to be, reached out to them, and those have all been taken care of and adjusted. We can look at and know and make sure that yes, people are being hired as long, you know, you're meeting the minimums, you're not exceeding that 75% rule without, now there are exceptions to that and they have to come through me. So that has been happening. So we do those sorts of audits. Yes.
And just as a follow-up, do you anticipate that that's something that is yearly that your office is going to take care of, right? Maybe
Correct.
at the end of the fiscal year, you're always going to say, okay, it's time to audit and just make sure
Yep.
everybody's where they should be.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. And then to follow up on this last bullet point, I'm not quite sure that you really got to it. But can you speak to that example on the bottom? It reads a little odd to me. So perhaps you could talk about that idea that the 3% increase to the pay band is only going to impact 8%. So can you talk to that?
Yeah. So when we increase the salary structure, if we increase the minimum of the pay band by 3%, only 8% of our KCTCS employees would be below that new pay band minimum. So they would be required to be brought up to that new minimum.
Right. And, you know, and I'm thinking, I guess, kind of from a historical point of view, VP Cantor, right? And that was way back when I think I was first on the board. But, you know, we raised, and of course, I'm thinking of market, low, market, and high. But we raised market on that salary schedule. And then, of course, thinking for faculty, we raised market, I think administrative too, and high, but we did nothing to low. And this was kind of a point that I would like to still see. So Todd, if you're listening, old buddy, he used to hate when I asked for this, but I'm going to ask for it again because, you know, we have realized over time that most of our employees don't live in mid. and they don't live in high. They were hired in at low, and we've talked about, right, we'll retire or die before we reach market. But I would love to see a scatter plot or scatter graph. I'm not sure, different people call it different things, to see where the majority of our employees are living. Are they living in those low pay bands still, market, or are they living in high? That would be great information, I think, to have prior to June.
Okay.
Thank you. It's on the list.
I heard you.
Which really means I heard you, so. Okay. So then we're shifting now into actual scenarios of what we could possibly, options that we have been throwing around and running numbers for and all of the things and discussing the pros and cons of with Dr. Quarles' leadership and all of the presidents. So obviously, first off the bat is we could do nothing, right? We could say that we're not going to give any salary increase, budgets being what they are, concerns about revenue and increased expenses. So we will choose to do nothing. That's a possibility as a scenario. Could that help budgetarily with any possible budget shortfalls that any of the colleges might be concerned about? Absolutely. It does limit recurring expenses, but I think we all can agree that that has a negative impact on employee morale, retention, recruitment, all of which were things that are important to the compensation program and why we did this review in the first place. There would be no movement of our employees towards just what you were talking about, Regent Whitten, in terms of trying to get employees to market at least. So that would not happen. And it just does not align with what the compensation philosophy is for KCTCS. An alternate scenario that we have discussed is just a flat percent increase, and that could be anything from 1% to 3% is the conversations that we have been having. That would be for all eligible employees. And so as Regent Stevens had asked, that is all full and part-time regular status employees. They'd have to be hired on or before March 31st of 2026. And they must at least have a meets expectations performance rating. The pros to that, the majority of our employees would obviously benefit. There would be upward movement within the pay band, so they would be moving closer towards market. Their compa ratio, which we've talked about, would increase as well, which is in alignment with the compensation philosophy of KCTCS. The cons to that, if you will, or the downside, is that it doesn't allow for individual employee or position considerations. It is a all for one, basically, mentality. So there's not any type of recognition for your high achievers, people who have been here for a long period of time. And then obviously there is a budgetary impact because that is increased recurring expenses to the college and the system office's budgets. This again is the same chart that Todd showed previously. So it just, again, is just reiterating what those flat percentage increases might look like in terms of the budgetary impact by college or by location. Depending upon which route we went, we could go anywhere from 3.3 million to almost just shy of $10 million as an increase to the budgets. The final scenario is similar to, as you will recall, what we did last year. So you could do a flat percentage increase and then do an additional compression type adjustment for an additional increase, but to stay within that 3% conversation that we continue to have, so that would be kind of the totality, the max budget available. The eligibility would be the same as it relates to full and part-time regular employees with that March 31st on or before hire date and the meets expectations performance rating. As we thought through what that compression adjustment would look like, if you recall back in September at Jefferson, we rolled out and showed to you a compression formula that we were going to utilize, that would utilize the compa ratio, years in position, and then the performance rating. Those would be the things that we would use. And so the compa ratio is weighted at 50%, years in position is at 25%, and the performance rating was rated at 25% in that formula. The presidents also, we've had conversation and they asked us to also think about years of service again. So we could do either or as it relates to this particular scenario, if we wanted to go that route with that compression adjustment piece. It would be calculated, so we would use the same formula in terms of how it would be implemented. So any increase that the Board of Regents would approve as an across the board increase would happen first. And then that additional compression adjustment would be calculated on that new salary. So that would, just depend. And I just looked at that and realized that's a typo. So it would not be 0 to 2%. It would be the 1 to 2% as an additional administrative approval. Pros and cons of each of these, and we've had a lot of discussion with PLT, with the HR leadership of the different colleges about years in position versus years of service. I will say we're probably split right down the line as to which way different groups lean. Years of position it does put us in alignment with the actual compensation philosophy of the compensation program. It recognizes the knowledge and skills and responsibilities that employees have obtained through their longevity in the position. And it also provides that upward movement within the pay band in which they currently sit. I will be very forthright with you and say that there are challenges for us as it relates to calculating that and how best to communicate that with employees that in a way and such that they would be able to understand that. The years of service, on the other hand, recognizes the longevity and the loyalty of our employees. Morale is very easily impacted. It's easy to calculate and it's easy to communicate years of service. And again, it too would provide that upward movement. But the focus of that becomes on the employees' years of service, not necessarily where they have moved and the positions that they have held within the organization. And so that is in contrast to what the actual philosophy and best practices within the compensation program are. So that just gives you a little bit of an idea in terms of the conversations that we have been having with the leadership as it relates to different scenarios, different options and possibilities. And certainly are, welcome any questions and any feedback that you all might have.
We have some questions. Ms. Powers?
Can't hear you.
Okay, hear you.
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, this is like the curse meeting with the headsets and stuff. So I've been looking into this, like the scenarios for the years in position versus the years in of service. And so, just from like an HR perspective and just from an employee morale perspective, the years in position, I think would be a bad idea. Because one, you're going to have people that have worked in positions that it may not be unclear or maybe unclear of when they transitioned into those other positions. And when they've worked here for 25 years and, they deserve that percent, that little percent that we're able to give them. And so to me, the years in position doesn't mean much to me personally, because you may have, worked your way up, been here 20 years and been in 7 different positions in that time. And then you're not even going to be eligible for the raise. And that would just be so like hurtful for like morale and for like a lot of other things. But on the flip side of it, trying to calculate that, trying to figure out, if you ran an HR report and you looked at it, all the details of all the different positions. I know I personally have worked in several different positions across, my time here. And that's not the reason I'm fighting for this, but my title's changed a bunch, but my job hasn't. And so every time, when you're looking at those HR reports and you're looking at all those data changes, trying to decipher that, was this really a promotion? Was this just a title change? I think that would be very hard to calculate.
Thank you.
Brianna?
Yeah, Regent Powers took the words right out of my mouth. And the only thing that I would actually ask VP Cantor, I mean, we're presented there with those two, right? It's either the years in position or the years of service. I wonder, again, has the system office, HR, or perhaps even your peer team considered other options that we, that would be scalable enough for us to kind of actually implement, that do align with that compensation philosophy that we have worked so hard to cultivate, at the system office. So maybe question mark, I guess. Can you answer that?
So we have not, Regent Witten, and specifically because we rolled out in September at the board meeting last year, that compression formula that was specific to had years in position. Years of service was what we utilized last year, because we felt strongly about that. As the very first year of doing that, we wanted to make sure that we recognized the longevity that we knew that we had with a lot of employees. So we have only looked at those two for that specific reason, because that was what we had put out there last year. But certainly it does not mean that we can't have additional conversations about that.
Thank you.
Mr. Cox?
There we-
Yeah,
there we go.
Okay, go.
Can you, everybody hear? Yep,
Yes.
okay. So first off, what a great presentation and what a thorough thought process. And I appreciate there. I guess Todd, specifically for you, is there any way that we could run some stress testing on this budget from the standpoint of what it would mean with variations of, I guess, enrollment, and variations on some revenue things? Because I feel like you all got a good handle on the cost side and the expense side. But I feel like that we're pretty vulnerable with the revenue side, just from a Regents perspective and comfort around budgeting. Have you got any thoughts on that, or you're thinking through how we would react from a stress testing perspective, especially on, readily knowing if we have less revenue, what scales down to less expenses to match it? There's some expenses that are just going to be there, but what are the ones that we would match up with if we have, because I may be wrong, but I think that's really the biggest variable that I see here is your enrollment issues. I mean, what you're going to go up when tuition as far as cost goes is a little bit, but am I right am I close on that, Todd?
Yep. Regent Cox, I think absolutely. And part of the information we should be getting in the next week or so is, as the colleges have put their budgets together, we're trying to understand across the scope of all 16 colleges, what is the impact as we look at that 3%. They've been building it in and trying to figure that out, but they're having to make adjustments in different places in very different ways. And so we are anticipating by next Monday, or Tuesday, excuse me, we should have more information around that and be able to take a look at that in preparation for our June board meeting. I don't think we know that quite yet, but we acknowledge that for some of our colleges, to do a 3% cut, for example, may mean some staffing reductions. For other colleges, it could potentially mean they adjust some things that they were going to do or planning to do, new initiatives that they will postpone for a year. So we'd really like to take a look at that and see what that looks like before we get to the June meeting.
Great. I think it'd be helpful for us to have some kind of an idea in June that if this is off, these are the expenses that we know immediately we could impact. Here are the ones that we're not going to be able to impact. So that kind of changes our thoughts on, how we look at budget. The other question I had, Todd, from a spread perspective, is there anything unique in your way of thinking with this budget than other years, or do you feel like it's going to be the same sort of spread month by month?
I think at this point it'll be the same kind of spread, but yeah, that I don't know that I have all the data to back that up, but I think that's where it will probably land at this point.
Great job. Really great job.
And Regent College, I think that's similar to what the other public 4 years are into. It's evolutionary, kind of building off previous years. And then also you touched upon one of the bigger issues in higher education budgeting in Kentucky is that we simply don't have the information available and kind of hardwired prior to a June meeting. And I'm not suggesting this, but other institutions in the state don't adjust compensation until later in the year, until they know what the revenue side is on enrollment. That's just let you know there's some variation out there about how this budgeting process works.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Regent Powers?
I just had one more question. So in regards to pulling back on the dual credit scholarships for gen ed, is there a way that we can figure out how many people in the last year or two that received both scholarships to try to project, if if they utilize both scholarships, then we could potentially see what that would look like, percentage wise for next year? I know
Yes,
that we're going to have different people, but overall schools, I think that would be similar percentage wise.
And so that's where we've tasked the ORPA to take a crack at this. And in fact, we were talking about it just this morning. The complexity in projecting how that affects us is pretty immense, given how there literally is a county by county approach to this. But our team's working on exactly the scenario you just talked about for those students that utilize both, and see if we can get some projections based off that data.
Brianna?
Yeah, Dr. Coles, just to kind of follow up with what Regent Powers brought up and kind of what we've all been, I think, dancing around with dual credit. I mean, I believe as a system, right, we're at 38%. Some of our colleges, I believe, are as high as 60% of their enrollment is dual credit. And some live somewhere lower or in the middle. So it would be really interesting to kind of maybe discuss, or if you can maybe add anything to the idea of having a dual credit strategy system wide. Do we need to cap it? Do we need to take another look? Especially at colleges where the dual credit rate is so high, and they're going to be much more affected by this than others. I just wondered if you had any thoughts on that.
Well, my thoughts would be make KCTCS the sole provider of dual credit in Kentucky, but we know our legislature will definitely disagree with that, and our public and privates would as well. But all joking aside, I think that'd be a great goal, and for this upcoming year that we can present and challenge our system to get a better handle on the long-term strategy for dual credit. I think this is something that's not unique to KCTCS. It's all of higher ed. I think you're seeing this in the 4 years with public and private. This is higher education is more or less teaching the senior year of high school right now at a lot of our high schools. And so I think that would be a great goal for us to consider over the next year. Long-term strategy on it.
I have a question for Todd. Todd, would it be possible to look at the administrative cost for the last 3 years and then the proposed budget that includes student enrollment, the student number of staff members, and the president's cabinet, as well as the systems cabinet, the increases or the salaries for those? Because as Mr. Cox said, we're always hunting for money. I don't want anybody to lose their job. But, basically, I think that my encouragement to college presidents, and I've encouraged this to Dr. Qualls, is as we have major vacancies to come available, try to consolidate those if you can, and sometimes you cannot, into a business so we can save as much administrative cost as possible. Thank you, Todd.
Thank you. It's on our list. And just one more topic here. If you're all ready to move on, I still want to hear your input on compensation. Is that we did have another mechanism for revenue in this past budget for all of higher education. Now the Kentucky Department of Revenue will be taking over the debt collection. They previously did that for us, and so we know that we'll have a higher rate of success with that. That can go back to our college's operational budget. So that's just another piece of public policy that passed that we know that will help us recapture what we believe is over $20 million in bad debt across the system. So before we go into financial reserves, which is the last and final presentation today, we did talk with PLT today, going through the scenarios. I think a lot of folks are comfortable with either way you want to go. If you want to go with across the board, or if you want to do across the board plus a compression component as well. I really just need to hear from you what your all's preference would be. And if you don't have a strong opinion today, that's okay. You can always call me, but I just want to kind of throw out the different options, but we're prepared to implement whichever route that you want to go. And if you want us to do back-to-back compression adjustments, we need to hear from you as well. But if not, across the board is something we're prepared to do.
Marty, you have a question?
The bad debt collection, you said, I mean, it's going to be a pretty big chunk because I know in the past 3 years, there's a lot of them we haven't gotten. Are we going to be able to go back in time and get some of those folks that we were slipping out, or is this just starting effectively now? The rest of them escaped. You know what I'm saying?
Rita Sutherland, we're taking a look into that. The law just was put into effect. We're going to start with the ones we have at the moment.
Okay.
Because I think across the system, they're going to be overwhelmed before they can even staff up to try to address it. But we're not clear as to whether we can go back. We would certainly like to, but we just don't know at this point what that looks like. But we want to. The other piece, I think we really want to try to do, actually have the business officers coming to town tomorrow, is we want to talk through our debt collection strategies together to try to figure out, are there ways that we can reduce the number of students that actually get to debt collection? How do we help our students to not go there in the first place? And that's something we can do internally without depending on the Department of Revenue. But we don't know yet if we can go back and collect from the past.
Because that is a pretty good chunk of change.
And we also were talking about if a student comes back to us saying, I want to continue my studies at KCTCS, that we don't let a debt collection issue prevent them from coming back if the amount, let's say, is relatively marginal as well. So that's a conversation we're having at each college.
Okay. Flipping over to the other side, your question as I was thinking of that question. On the compensation, right now it's a struggle for everybody. And me, I'm as advocate of compression as anyone, being around as long as I have. But I'm okay this year with trying to touch or just fix everybody's salary across the board. And then maybe hit compression again next year or something. Kind of spread it out a little bit, because I know we can't fix it all in one shot. And I know it's going to take a few years anyway. And but looking around and talking to everybody, everybody's concerned. I know everybody's hurting, and everybody drove by the gas pumps today and dropped their mouths like, how much? So the best we could do with across the board would be, I think, kind of what I'm hearing from my faculty.
Thank you.
I concur with that.
I want to tell you and your staff, I'm going to give you a 9.97 on your presentation today. That's the highest I've ever given anybody at KCTCS. So I thought your people did a great job. Thanks to you and Dr. Qualls.
We appreciate that. And if you want to go for the hat trick, we have our third presentation ready to go for you right now.
All right, our financial reserves, known as the fund balance question. I feel like there should be a drum roll or trumpets or something at the beginning of this conversation. So let me just give you a little context for the discussion. This was initially flagged to me when I got here as a question about one particular fund, Fund 99. And every quarter when we presented to the audit committee, we had said this was one of the issues that the forensic auditors didn't take up, but we would look at Fund 99. And when we dug into it, really Fund 99 is a pass-through fund, and primarily pension funds go there. They come in and they go out. There's not a lot of balance in Fund 99 overall. It's primarily that pension fund. But as we thought about it, and as I had conversations with folks here at the system office and board members had talked to me, what I think people were really asking is, we'd really like some transparency around the funds that we have available. What's our reserve? And so we've tried to give you a comprehensive picture of the totality of the reserves. So it's way more than just Fund 99. We've, in essence, turned the couch cushions over. We've tried to find every penny, every dime that we have. If there's, I don't think there's any secret things that are hidden away. This really is trying to be with you as transparent as we know how to be with the information we have. Like, here's what it is. Here's what the reserve is. And on the next slide, I would just point out, so we tried to figure out what's our starting point. So that you have some confidence in what we're going to share with you. We're using the benchmark of our last audited financial statements because we have external auditors who thoroughly review how we track our money, where our funds are. And so we're using that benchmark from June 30th of last year to indicate to you and show you where our reserves are listed in our financial statements, and indicate to you that they always have been part of the annual external review and audit that we do. We just want to make sure that you see that because it's not always evident in all of that information that our external auditors give to us. So we've chosen to use this because it is a benchmark that's been evaluated by independent auditors. So we're going to talk about a few areas: our needs and uses for our reserves, how we measure and report it, what our composition is, and then looking at it from a system-wide perspective. So why do we need reserves? Well, to bridge cash flow. When we do payroll every couple of weeks, that comes from, we need our reserves to be able to cover that. We use it for purchasing and maintaining productive assets. So we have reserves to be able to, across the system, to be able to maintain our buildings, to purchase things that we need to maintain, to follow best practices for our long-term sustainability. So we make sure that we're aligning with what best practices are, to make sure that we maintain financial solvency, to maintain our creditworthiness and our bond ratings. For those of you who follow that, our bond rating is A1, or as my team keeps saying, like the steak sauce. Please don't tell people that our credit rating is 57. That would be different, but it's an A1 credit rating. To be able to weather economic cycles as we see things happening at the federal level, being able to handle some of those things, and to fund our strategic investments. So there's a purpose for our reserves and why we keep them, and we'll talk a little bit more about some specific examples to follow. So just to talk about how we measure and report this, there is no single mandated standard for measuring reserves in public higher education. We tried to find, is there somebody who says it absolutely has to be this much? There isn't one. We'll talk about what we think that should be, but we use it through a combination of standardized financial data, broader financial health indicators, the IPED system, or Integrated Post-Secondary Education Data System. We take a look at those things. A big piece is our Composite Financial Index, which is a series of ratios. It was a metric developed by KPMG, the audit firm, to try to determine institutions' viability and flexibility. We use the recommendations from the National Association of College and University Business Officers, or NACUBO, and then we've looked at the Government Finance Officers Association. What we generally hear is that maintaining reserves, the best practice is to have several months, 3 to 5 months of operating expenses is considered a prudent practice. So for us, that's the equivalent of about 150 days. So should everything else shut down, should we need reserves to move forward, we like to have the 5 months is about 150 days. We could maintain operations with no more revenue for that period of time.
So Tom, what does that make a day's worth of cash on hand for you? I could do the math, but you probably know it right off the bat.
Could you say that again? I'm sorry, I didn't.
What does that make one day's expenses for you? Like you got 150. I'm trying to do the math. So what is one day's of expense for you?
I don't know that off the top of my head, and with people in this room, let alone all you looking at me, I can't do it quickly, but I will. We will
okay.
find that out. Brendan is here in the room, and he can calculate that for me over there in the corner.
I didn't mean I could have calculated. I thought
Yeah,
maybe
we
you
can.
guys know.
Yeah, I don't
think it's
necessarily
an
have that
important
number.
part of this. I think it's important because if you go back there, certainly when you're being reviewed by ratings agencies, this is a big number, right? I mean, this is an important one that they look at.
Correct. And that's what I was going to say. We're going to start talking about some big numbers here.
Okay.
And try to help understand what that looks like. And there's some variations on it that we'll talk about.
It's looking about 1.79 million a day.
That's significant. I think the board needs to know that. I mean, that shows you the scope and size and complexity of this. And, you know, I think when I talked about, you know, budget stress testing, this is probably one of our hedges on that too, is to say, hey, you know, we're going to need to have, I would say probably at least 150, probably closer to best practice is going to be somewhere around 175 to 200 days cash on hand.
Right.
Thank you.
Right. So when we look at this, we're going to use the number that's our unrestricted net position. We have a balance. It's a big number. Again, we'll talk about that a little bit. But really, what is our unrestricted net position? There are some things that we just can't touch. Pensions, for example, is something that we don't touch. We can't dig into. But what is our unrestricted net position? It doesn't mean that we don't have them kind of set aside for particular things, but there's no restriction on our ability to spend them. This number is used for our external reporting to CPE, to the Legislative Research Commission, other benchmark reports. This is the number that we use. And it's our financial resources available for general operations. And, you know, we don't often talk about the fact that we're a $1.2 billion operation. And it does require us to be able to have reserves to provide stability, to be able to respond quickly to cash flow changes or emergencies that come up. So we will be talking about some big numbers here. But I'm hopeful that we can talk about why we have them and what they represent. So if we can go to the next slide. So when we look at our unrestricted net position, and again, this is a page out of our financial statement as of June 30th, 2025. That number is in thousands, so that's 239,790,000. We'll talk about what that represents in a minute. But those are the unrestricted funds. We do have some restricted funds that are non-expendable, expendable. The OPEB trust, for example, is part of the restricted section. And we do have assets that are capital assets that we can't just quickly sell. So the unrestricted net position is the number from which we're working, $239 million. But let's dig into that number a little bit. And just talk about what that represents. So we go to the next slide. So within that composite financial index that I mentioned is a series of ratios. One of the ratios is what's called the primary reserve ratio, which asks the question, are resources sufficient and flexible enough to support our mission? And so you calculate that ratio by taking the unrestricted net assets, that 239 million that you see circled at the top, and you divide that by our total operating and non-operating expenses, which is $701 million. And that gives you your ratio, which in this particular case is 0.34. And then you multiply that 0.34 times 365, the number of days in a year, it gives you the number of days of expenses that are covered by our reserves. So we use this calculation. We actually use this with each of our colleges as well as the system as a whole to try to determine that. And again, we want to try to maintain 3 to 5 months. We would like to be at 150 days. But this is where those reserves are now. So when you look at that number, it seems like a big number. That's what's built into this. Well, let me point out how that's represented. So what's the composition of that $239 million? So we go to the next slide. I think this is significant for our understanding of this. Of that 239 million, there's a significant portion that actually is with the Fire Commission and State Fire Rescue Training. About 20% of our unrestricted net position actually lives with the Fire Commission. And so that's actually money, while it sits in that number on our financial statements, we don't have access to. We can't access it even in the midst of an emergency. When you look at the rest of what we have, which is just under 200 million, 101.7 million as of June 30th last year is in the colleges, what they call their fund balances. So our net position that lives in those college fund balances that they have, and colleges can use their fund balances for construction or other things. You as a board set a certain percentage of that that needs to be set aside for untouchable reserves, but we have that. And then system support, what we have here at the system is a total of $89.7 million, or about 37% of that total unrestricted net position. This can be designated, it can be encumbered, it can be committed, but it does provide support for our non-recurring needs. I want to make clear, we've made it our philosophy here, particularly in the last year, that we think of that system support as that's a system reserve, not a system office reserve. That is not for the system office to use as we so choose. That's here to support our colleges and the operations that we have. And I think that's an important distinction. We keep those funds available to be able to support the needs of the colleges as they come along. These balances have been built by not spending the total budget each year and rolling it over, hence the carry forward from year to year. It comes from the interest that comes off of these accounts, and the interest goes into the system support side. But this is our unrestricted net position broken down by those three areas. And so when you look at this, understand this is not just a whole lot of money that sits at the system office for what we choose to do with it. Some of it's very clearly within the Fire Commission. Much of it lives at the colleges. And then we have some here at the system office within this category we're calling system support. So when we look at that, the section that's just system support, that $89.7 million, what's included in that? So we're kind of breaking it down, going down the pyramid, if you will, to take a look at it. We currently have about 25 million in an employee benefits pool. In that fringe rate that we talk about, over the years, sometimes we've not spent that. We try to budget for that so there can be additional things. That goes into an employee benefits pool that we acknowledge and we track separately. There's $11 million in KCS trains and money that's not yet been spent for particular projects or other administrative funds that it's there. There's $2.5 million in other mandated or self-sustaining programs like our adult agriculture education. Kentucky nurse aid training is also part of those self-sustaining programs, and we even do have some obligations with the Department of Insurance. So that doesn't include everything, but those are some significant things that live within that 89.7 that are there, and yet they're considered unrestricted dollars. We also, here at the system, follow the same obligation. This year you voted 3.5% of a mandated reserve. We put a mandated required reserve for that system support amount that we can't touch unless it's an emergency and the president gives us that authorization. So that's what's within the system support balance number.
Hey, Todd,
So yes.
go back to that slide for a second. How's that $25 million in employee benefits pool considered unrestricted? Is it just the way that you all account for it? It must not be against anything of retirement or pension then?
Correct. It's not connected to anything pension related. It comes from that fringe rate of benefits. And again, we try to make sure that we build enough in to cover all the employee benefits for the year. Over the years, there's been additional funding that has not been spent on employee benefits and lands within that employee benefits pool.
So has that number increased through the years?
It has increased through the years. And we'll comment in just a moment that it's decreased as well.
Okay.
So if we go to the next slide, I'll actually go to the second one. So this year, when we had the 16.8% increase in our insurance, we understood that for our colleges, the cost of insurance was going to be for the first 6 months a little over $4 million. And that's the very purpose that we would have this benefits pool for. If there's some additional thing that helps us. So we didn't have to ask the colleges to make any budget cuts in the first 6 months. It gave them time to build their budgets together. We didn't have to go to our employees and say, we're asking you to increase your portion of your insurance benefit. We were actually able to cover that insurance increase for the first 6 months of the year out of that benefits pool. So next year, when we come to the end of those our financial statements and we look at that benefits pool, it will decrease by just slightly over that $4 million because we used that particular pool for those insurance increases. And these two things are really just within the last year and a half. There's also a GASB standard, that's the Government Accounting Standards Board, that indicated that we had to set aside all the money for all of our compensated absences, both vacation and sick time. That money had to be set aside. That was going to be a significant impact to our college's individual financial statements. If we took a look at that, that was roughly $700,000 a college on average. We were able to take some of that unrestricted net position, take $11.4 million and set that aside. So it gave our colleges a little bit of breathing room on their financial statements and utilize it for it. In both these instances, these were used for the benefit of the system. Again, this was not a system office thing, though the system office certainly had compensated absences and benefits involved here. But this was a system-wide use of our KCTCS reserves. And so when we think about this, the one other point I would make is if we went back to that chart and we looked at the Fire Commission's percentage, by statute, we can't touch that. So even while it's there on the financial statements, we can't touch that. If we excluded that from that number, we would actually have just about 100 days worth of reserves, not the 150 we would like to have, or the 175 that would make us feel a little more comfortable. So while these look like big numbers, I would say that we're healthy. We don't have, I think, an overabundance in our reserves. We try to use them wisely to not have to figure out would we go to the Commonwealth and say, we need money for insurance increases. We try to be fiscally responsible so we can manage those kinds of things that arise when they arise. 2 years ago, we had no idea that either of those items would be confronting us, but we had the reserves to be able to manage it and deal with it. And so here's our commitment to you. We want to continue to report our unrestricted reserves through KCTCS leadership and our Board of Regents after the year-end close. So when we do our audited financial statements, after the auditors have reviewed all of this information and taken a look at it, we want to come to you on an annual basis and indicate here's what that number is so that you don't have to question that again. We're actually working on a KCTCS scorecard around a number of things that at the AGB conference were put forward as here's what board should know. We want you to have that information at your fingertips. We'll continue to talk to our annual colleges about their unrestricted balances within the individual college leadership post-year-end close. And we are having some conversations, and we'll be talking to Dr. Quarles about how can we best utilize those funds that sit within that reserve. While we want them to remain available to us, could we do some short-term investing to try to use the interest from those investments to try to support things like scholarships or innovation funds or something along those lines. We've not made any determinations around that, but we want to continue to provide you with the transparency around what that number is and where it comes from, and how we calculate it and use it. So that's, as I say, those are some big numbers. But that's where the fund balance, if we will, the reserves live, how we think about them and how we're strategizing in the days ahead. And wanted to report that to you. So I'll stand for any questions that you all have.
That concludes all three presentations. So any other questions or thoughts you may have on the totality of today's presentation, please let us know.
Todd, back a few slides ago, talked about the unsupported or the unrestricted. It says $11 million for trains. What's the 11 million in trains about? Because I'm thinking it's 4 million.
Yeah, well, that's our annual distribution from the state. There's some money that was set aside for some administrative purposes. There's also at the end of the last fiscal year some money that had not yet been spent for trains. So that includes the balance of, they were in the middle of projects and it spends across fiscal years at times. And there are also some funds that were utilized again for administrative functions. So that's what encompasses that $11 million. The intent is to spend that, and we'd like to get to a place where we're making sure that all those dollars get spent appropriately.
Right. Well, we up the amount to 6 million for the next 2 years. And so I'm thinking that we'd be running a negative on that. So to see 11 million seemed awfully large.
Right.
Okay.
Any other questions? Another thing to be thinking about is that we believe that as we exit this General Assembly session, a lot of our peer institutions of public 4 years are being asked to do agency bonding of their capital projects. As you recall, we promulgated regs at KCTCS over the past year and a half or so to allow us to do that. That might be something we might look at as an option. Obviously, we'll be bringing proposals to you. Asset preservation has been very generous this last couple of years. We expected that to be reduced, and it was. And so we may get a little creative about how we fund projects that may not rank as high as we want them to be, but we might be able to knock them out with some agency bonding as well. That's be new territory for us. We'll continue to build up our college level reserves, focus on the cash on hand. But again, any other input you may have, please let us know. We're so happy to have a budget workshop well before the June meeting. So this gives you an opportunity to ask questions. We've created a list here of inquiries that you all have asked. We'll get back to you and share that with all board members per usual. Any other questions?
I just wanted to say thank you all so much for putting this together. It's been very helpful.
Thank you. Thank you for your time. I know you all are very busy people. Just 4 quick things. Number one, our June meeting's gonna be out in Hopkinsville, and we're gonna start off a new KCTCS tradition that at every board meeting, we're gonna hear from a student first, get a student highlight in their story. We're working on House Bill 619 implementation. We'll have a report for you at that June meeting. And then our graduation ceremonies are literally starting next week. And we'd love for you all to sit on stage and watch our 2 student regents walk across stage, but also participate across the state. So if you want to attend a graduation ceremony, just let Shannon know. We'd love to have you there. And finally, it's Derby week in Kentucky. Just 2 nights ago, got a picture of our current students at Bluegrass Community Technical College in our equine program telling Bob Baffert what to do. So it's really interesting seeing him on the backside of the track. But our students are literally part of a global event this weekend in Louisville. With that, Chair Hamilton, that concludes our reports. If there's any questions, and if not, I don't think you need them.
Well, I believe Dr. Quarles and Chair Hamilton, that with Regent Stevens and Regent Hunt having to leave the meeting a few minutes ago, we lost quorum. So Dr. Quarles and Chair Hamilton, you all can end the meeting.
You all ready to adjourn? Signify by saying thank you, goodbye. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you all.